We're going to record. Here we go, that age-old one. Welcome, everyone. My name is Erin Feichtinger. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the policy director here at the Women's Fund of Omaha, and I'm super excited to do these advocacy and these power hour calls with you. Now, before the next legislative session begins in January, we're going to be hosting these calls to talk about the issues impacting gender and racial equity. And if you've joined us in past years, we're taking a little bit of a different approach this year to sort of meet the moment. And today's webinar is going to focus on Big A for advocacy. So just a reminder before we start setting the stage, your voice matters, always. And as we prepare for what is sure to be another unprecedented legislative session in 2024, let's prepare to join together as advocates and allies for gender justice. Today, we're going to talk about what will be different in 2024, which is the second year of the biennium. We're also going to define what that means. We're going to preview potential rules changes and hear about what you can do right now to be ready on day one. So let's get started. I'm about to dump a lot of information, like I said, and one thing we're going to start with is a refresher on Legislature 101. We probably have folks joining us who feel incredibly well-versed in the way the legislature works, as well as folks who, jumped in last session and are ready to get even more activated this time around. So if this is just a refresh for you, that's fantastic. If this is new information, that's great. It's a lot of information, so if there are questions, please feel free to drop them in that Q&A box, and we will get to them. I'm also always available to answer questions offline. Now, this slide is not designed by a graphic designer, but we're going to work with it because I put in the text. But we're going to start off basic level. The Nebraska legislature, as I'm sure you have heard, is officially nonpartisan. There are 49 senators who serve for 4 years, and they are term limited to 2 consecutive terms. And that's going to be important. Those term limits are important for setting the stage about where our legislature is at right now. Now, being officially nonpartisan, if you've tuned into the legislature, you're probably like, that doesn't feel right. But what it means in practice is that there isn't a D or an R behind senators' names when you go to vote for them, which ideally would mean, too, that when senators go to do their own voting on bills, they aren't thinking about that D or R behind their names. It also means that senators don't caucus as a party or an ideological group, deciding a legislative agenda with each other as a party. So something that we are more familiar with seeing on the federal level. In the past, legislatures have more or less followed the spirit of nonpartisanship and used that freedom to compromise and work together that a nonpartisan legislative body affords to them. In the past, we have had more balanced committees with more level-headed committee chairs who have worked together to evaluate the actual worth and impact of a bill in front of them, trying to make decisions based on what is and is not good policy, not just in terms of the language of the policy and if it makes sense, but also what would help their constituents and Nebraskans. But those term limits and a more national shift to hyperpartisanship have done some serious damage on the legislature. If the 2023 session felt awful, and it was, this is in part because we lost a large group of more moderate senators who were replaced by hardline, far-right senators who are more comfortable breaking our traditional spirit of nonpartisanship and instead are more willing to draw from a national playbook of extreme harmful and discriminatory legislation. Now, I know if you're hearing this and you're thinking, well, it certainly has always felt like Nebraska is a red state, if not a deeply red state. In the legislature, that has looked different, and truly, for the most part, we have been shielded because of the way the legislature works from those national movements we're seeing across state legislatures. So for people who have worked in the body or around the body for a long time, this last session really was startling for everybody involved. It seemed like we'd taken a real departure from the way things had typically worked, from the way relationships had functioned, from the way conversations felt and proceeded, bills felt and proceeded. And it went off the rails very quickly and sort of went full steam ahead off a cliff from maybe day two. And it is in part to do with those term limits and the new group of senators that we have in the body. That harmful and discriminatory legislation that we saw last session, that legislation is being fast-tracked through legislative processes that have also been hijacked by partisanship. So we have stacked committees and committee chairs who last session prioritized scheduling divisive and harmful bills early on so that they could vote them out of committee and to a full legislature that had an equally partisan bent. And if you showed up to any committee hearings last session, particularly on things like the gender affirming care ban or the abortion ban, you felt probably that feeling of this, something isn't right here. And it feels very much like there's not a lot of interest in what actual Nebraskans have to say about any given issue. And that feeling that you felt is not wrong. It is valid. But this is the legislature that we have right now until the 2024 election, when fully half of our legislature is up for election. Anybody in an odd numbered district has the potential to lose, or we get new people. And despite that feeling of hopelessness that a lot of us might have felt in the last legislative session, if you're like me, maybe still recovering from a little bit, we can still change Nebraska for the better if we know what we're up against, how this all works, and if we're ready on day one. Now, a few things when I talked to folks over the last couple months, going around training folks who are getting engaged, who are getting activated. One thing that keeps coming up is these questions about what we're going to be facing next session, just even in terms of what's happening to the bills that came up in the first session. What should we sort of mentally be preparing for in terms of a schedule? What is it going to look like? How does it feel? And so it's good to talk about the idea that each legislature, and right now we're in the 108th legislature, each legislature meets twice in what is called the biennium. This particular legislature met for the first time all together as a group in that last session at the beginning of 2023. Now, both legislative sessions operate in roughly the same way with some differences, but broadly, senators can and will introduce as many bills as they want in the first 10 legislative days. Once those bills are introduced, they are referenced to their subject matter committees. Now, that also has an asterisk, because if you were engaged with us last session, you also knew that there was a fight over that referencing process, because it too should have been sort of exempt from partisanship, but was used to do some damage in something like referencing in LB 626, the abortion ban, into the much more anti-abortion committee, Health and Human Services, versus where every single other abortion ban has ever gone in the history of Nebraska, which is to the Judiciary Committee, which would have been a far less friendly committee to the LB 626. Now, one of the great features in Nebraska, and one of the reasons I love working in politics in this state, is that every bill is required to have a public hearing. So it doesn't matter, big issues, small issues, something particular to your life, your community, or something particular to the entire state, you are going to have an opportunity as a citizen to make your voice heard on any bill. And that's going back to that officially nonpartisan, unicameral system that we operate in. Now, when you're thinking about these new bills that are coming and their public hearings, and you're thinking, how will I know when to take off work? How will I know, how to schedule my life around the chaos of the legislature? Know that once those bills get introduced and the committee decides when to schedule it, they have to give the public 7 days notice. So you will have some time to prepare, get your carpools ready, get to Costco, buy your snacks. You'll have 7 days to do that. Now, the public can provide input either in person or through the online comment portal on each individual bill's page. One thing to note, and if you're following the Women's Fund, if you're tapped in, you're connected, you're going to get these updates, but on that online comment portion, those comments have to be uploaded by noon on the previous legislative day. So if it's a Monday hearing, it's going to be Friday. If it's a Tuesday hearing, it's going to be Monday if the legislature is in session. So just keeping aware of that. It's not, the normal people operating on a regular weekly schedule. It's the legislative schedule. Once a bill is heard in a committee, the committee meets in what is called an executive session. You may also have heard it called exec. And that is a meeting on a bill to vote on whether or not the bill will stay in committee or go to the floor for debate by the full legislature. When we're thinking about where we can engage in new ways in this new sort of political context where Nebraskans' voices are being intentionally disregarded and silenced, that moment after a bill is heard and before the committee is holding its executive session is a great opportunity for you to use your voice to email that particular committee and ask them to vote a certain way. If you've already done that in the hearing, if you've already done that on the online comment, at this point, I would encourage you, it is worth the effort to email the committee either with your testimony attached or just a note to say. Now, if the bill is voted out of committee, it will be debated by the legislature. It will be scheduled for debate. And each bill that makes it to the floor and gets scheduled goes through 3 rounds of debate. First is general file, second is select file, and the third round is final reading. A typical bill is going to require 25 votes to advance through each round of debate. If last session was your first session watching the legislature, you're like, I never saw a bill get 25 votes and pass the whole time. That's because every bill was getting filibustered. And even in a normal session, we would see bills get filibustered. Not everyone, but a handful. And if a bill is being filibustered, it takes 33 votes to overcome that filibuster and advance. So for the most part, if you're trying to think of vote counting, you're thinking of 25, you're thinking of 33, and occasionally you're thinking of 30, but that gets a little complicated, and I'm happy to answer those questions later. Now, the first session of the biennium, that 90-day session we just went through, that's called the long session, and I think we can all agree that it was indeed long. That lasts for 90 legislative days, not calendar days, but legislative days, so that everyone can get back for the harvest. I don't think anybody needs to get back for the harvest at this point, maybe a handful of senators, but that's why we set it up the way we do. In that first long session, the legislature is required to do a few things, and this is why it's long. First, they're required to set their own rules for how the legislature will work, how it will debate, and also how citizens can engage with the process. There is a long-standing rule book that senators can amend in this process. They can introduce new rules, like a Zoom option for testimony, which didn't pass. Or they can get rid of old ones, like allowing open carry in the Capitol. That one also didn't, you can open carry in the Capitol, you just can't have signs. In this first session, rules changes function a lot like regular bills. Senators introduce them. The Rules Committee, which is a temporary committee, holds a public hearing on the proposed changes. We saw a lot of citizens, more than I've seen, come out for that Rules Committee hearing, and that was wonderful and a great place to engage. And that committee is going to decide which rules come out of committee and onto the floor for debate. Now, sometimes this process can get extremely contentious, and rightly so. As we all know from our own experiences in various institutions with rules, those rules can be used to consolidate and exercise power for the majority in the body. The same is true in the legislature. We're going to put a pin in the rules for the moment, but it's important to understand that this rules process is another opportunity for citizens to engage with and intervene in the legislative process. If you as a citizen felt your voice wasn't heard, or something happened last session that you thought, well, that shouldn't be allowed, or something that would make the community safer, who's there lobbying, anything like that, those are all things that you can talk to your senator about and work with them, because it's not a bill, it's not a resolution, it's not a study, but it is a rules change that can benefit you or your community. Another thing the legislature is required to do in that first long session is select committees and committee chairs, and this is done via a secret ballot, which means that senators aren't supposed to know how anyone else voted for committees, committee chairs. Ostensibly, this is part of that officially nonpartisan spirit of the legislature, and has allowed senators to vote for who they think would actually be best on those committees. So taking into account expertise, for instance, versus how a senator will vote along party lines to advance a particular agenda. So a good example of where this went off the rails and was, became more partisan last session is someone like we have Senator John Frederickson in the body, who is the only mental health professional in the body at the moment. It would make sense that someone like Senator Frederickson would be on the Health and Human Services Committee because that's his expertise, his professional background. He is not on the Health and Human Services Committee, but he is on Transportation and Telecommunications. Same thing goes for something like Senator Conrad, who, when she was previously in the body, had been, spent 8 years on the Appropriations Committee, and though she asked to be on Appropriations again, was not seated on that committee. So this process too, it became highly partisan in the last legislative session, and has now resulted in the lopsided committee and committee chairs that we have right now for some of these committees. Not all of them, but some big important ones. Now, the partisanship of committee chairs is a problem right now. It is important because it means that these committee chairs control the schedule of hearings and bills, and how a hearing will operate. Each committee has its own rules about how citizens can engage there, have different time limits, different numbers of copies, that kind of thing. So consequences of something like that, I think a lot of us experienced last session, what we saw in the LB 574, LB 575, and LB 626 hearings where people waited for hours and public participation was sort of arbitrarily limited, and people got turned away and didn't get to have their voices heard on incredibly impactful issues. It also means that we're scheduling contentious and harmful bills in committee, which puts them on the floor earlier for debate before bills that would actually help Nebraskans. It also means, obviously, that in a stacked committee, more harmful bills are more likely to get out of committee and onto the floor, instead of what we've typically seen in past legislatures who had more balanced committees being thoughtful about whether a bill actually made any sense and whether it was ready and worthy for full debate by the legislature, instead of what the newest flavor of the moment is from a national playbook. So another good example of this is LB 574. The breakdown of the committee process of that nonpartisanship at every step of the way means that LB 574, which makes no practical sense as a workable policy, not to mention the incredible harm and pain that it has already caused and will continue to cause to Nebraskans, a bill like that, which doesn't make any sense, doesn't fit into statute, gets voted out of committee instead of being held there since it's a bad bill. And the third thing the legislature is supposed to do in that long session is pass a budget. So I'd like to congratulate every one of you Nebraska citizens for your brand new private lake in Ashland, and a water canal that will be tied up in 10 years of legislation. I wish I could see everyone's reaction because I thought that was a pretty good joke. The second session of this 108th legislature begins on January 3rd and runs through April. This session is the short session, but it's not going to feel that way. It's 60 legislative days. It's shorter because the legislature should have already taken care of the business of rules, committee selection, and the budget. So we would typically think of this session as finishing the legislature's business from that first session. A few extremely important things to note about this upcoming second session in 2024. Every bill that did not pass last session, and there's a substantial number of them, each of those bills is still active, whether they're in committee or in the queue for debate. When the legislature adjourned at the end of the first session, when they adjourned sine die, all those bills got frozen in place and can pick up immediately on day one. So if you can check the bill listing, and if you check that bill listing at the link provided, I think it's in the chat, you will see the bills that are still active. They will be listed as either referral, which means they're in committee, or on general file, select file, meaning they are being debated by the full legislature. So they just paused in time. Each of those bills from last session has already had a public hearing. There will not be another public hearing on any of the bills that you were paying attention to last session. Now, this does not mean that you don't have a chance as a citizen to provide input. You always have a chance as a citizen to provide input. So if you missed the opportunity last session, if you didn't get a chance to testify on 574 or 575, if you forgot to submit a comment by the deadline, et cetera, whatever, life happens. You still have an opportunity, if that bill is still live, to email your senator, to email that committee, and ask them to do the thing that you want on that bill. Just because there's not a public hearing doesn't mean the public shouldn't be heard, just to let you know. Now, importantly, because all those bills are still active, and there were 820 bills introduced last session, 50 were signed by the governor. So there's a lot left over. But what this means is that we all need to be ready on day one of the upcoming session. It means that theoretically the Education Committee could meet on that first day, January 3rd, and vote out LB 575, the bathroom and sports ban. Or it could vote out LB 374, which is the Extreme Parents' Rights Bill. The Health and Human Services Committee could meet January 3rd and vote out LB 810, the bill that would allow healthcare providers to deny care based on their personal beliefs. Now, I'm always doom and gloom, and if you know me, you know that's true. So I want to provide some more positive bent as well. This could also mean that on day one, LB 58, the sales and use tax exemption for diapers, could be voted out of revenue, or the child tax credit, or universal school meals. So there's good things that we have in the queue as well, and I don't want us to forget, lose sight of that as well. So when you're checking that bill listing, when you're going through those bills and finding those issues and bills that you care about, keep that in mind too. I need your support on the good ones. All of this to say that if you thought we had the same amount of time as last session to prepare for votes, to prepare for debates, to prepare for conversations with senators, this is not the case. We are going to have to hit the ground running. And you can always use the Women's Fund's bill page as well if you're looking for a starting point for talking to your senators. In addition to all of the bills that did not pass last session, senators can and will introduce entirely new bills in the first 10 days of session. Now, with the exception of the two newly appointed senators, so Fred Meyer took Senator Tom Breezy's spot when Breezy got appointed to the state treasurer position, and Carolyn Bosin took over for Suzanne Geist after, in the middle of last session, when Geist left to run for Lincoln mayor. So with the exception of those two newly appointed senators who just took over their predecessor's spot, committee makeup and committee chairs will also remain the same from the first session. So this upcoming session, there's a couple things that we're carrying over, and there's also going to be some notable differences. Because we are starting on day one with all of the past bills, and we'll have a fresh slate of newly introduced bills, some of which will be good and some of which will be horrific and lots in between. We will likely also have an accelerated hearing schedule that's happening at the same time as floor debate. So basically, we are dealing with working on old bills on the floor and in committee, and working on new bills through that process that you're probably familiar with from last session. I should have inserted a meme or whatever on this slide that's just chaos Elmo, because that's kind of what it's going to feel like for a little bit. Because of last session's filibuster and the lingering hurt feelings in the body, because sometimes the Nebraska legislature really is just like high school, we will also likely see new rules proposed for the next session that are going to limit senators and individual senators, or even a group of the senators in the minority. It's going to limit their power to control debate, possibly including reducing that 33 vote threshold to break a filibuster down to something like 30. Now, that rumor has been floating around every session that I've been a part of, but I think given what happened last session, it's a possibility, a more likely possibility, that we would see that introduced and get more support than it has in the past. Now, this is incredibly important if it does get introduced, and I can't say that for certain, but if it does get introduced, that would be an incredibly important moment for citizens to get engaged in, because that 33 vote threshold has protected us from a lot of really incredibly destructive legislation, including the passage of LB 626, because they only got 32. Now, next session, if you remember from the first session, we had the Rules Committee. In the second session, since the Rules Committee is a temporary committee, these rules changes could go through the temporary Rules Committee, but I'm not certain that there's a lot of appetite to take that much time for these rules changes, depending on the rules that are being proposed. So we may or may not go through a public hearing process for rules changes. It's possible that we will see the speaker introduce rules changes from the floor of the legislature, which would mean no public hearing option, but rather that the full legislature could debate their adoption. Now, once again, just because there's not a public hearing option doesn't mean that you as the public cannot make your voice heard. And if those rules changes are coming directly from the floor, that's an opportunity to engage your senator directly and ask them to vote in the way that you would like to see. Some other possible rules changes that we might see: there is always talk of limiting the amount of bills that senators can introduce, but I don't think we will see that this session. I think that that's going to keep growing as an interest because of the sheer amount of bills and the willingness of certain senators to introduce and push through incredibly divisive legislation that slows down the work of the legislature and pushes other bills off the schedule. More likely, we're going to see calls to limit the number of bills that can be included in a package of bills because of what happened last session when 20 bills were being added into a package as the underlying bill progressed through debate. Now, that was what we had to do in the moment to get some stuff across the finish line, including SNAP and child care subsidies. It also results in a fun game for those of us in the rotunda to see how many times senators can say the word package in a 3-minute floor speech. I believe Senator DeBoer won, just to let everyone know, last session. I think we will also see rules proposed that limit the ability of an individual senator to control debate. Again, a reaction to last session's filibuster. That could look like something like saying, limiting the ability to speak on anything in a filibuster, defining what on topic means, which would shut down debate. I mean, we can work with it, but it's fine. And also probably limiting motions, amendments from the floor. In terms of being able to advocate on any of those proposed rules changes, we won't know until the session starts exactly which rules and changes we will see. But it's a safe bet that whatever rules are introduced will be targeted at avoiding the slowdown of last session. And on the one hand, senators who support these kinds of rules changes will say that it's helping Nebraskans by helping the legislature to do the business of the state. On the other hand, one could make the argument that using the rules to limit the minority's power in turn limits the voices of Nebraskans whose rights are being stripped away by a partisan legislature whose priorities are not reflective of the majority of Nebraskans. We might make that argument. I don't know. I'm just throwing ideas out here. We will also, those rules changes will happen at the beginning of sessions. So since we're all going to be ready on day one, we will keep you updated on rules changes, but it's also something to be thinking about as you're talking to your own state senator or other state senators. Which brings us to how we're going to be ready on day one for all of this Chaos Elmo meme stuff. Which is actually the professional term, Chaos Elmo meme stuff. So you can throw that around. So knowing what we know, how are we going to be ready on day one? I am more and more convinced after last session that our way of training advocates and engaging the public worked for a long time, but is not going to meet our startling and terrifying current political moment. And I think in the past, it has worked. We've asked you to testify at a hearing, submit comments, come for the day of debate, be in community with us. And while all of those efforts and levels of engagement have been and will continue to be incredibly important, we need to be doing more when we can. So, and I'm not saying that to make you feel like you're not doing enough, because if you're on this call, you're probably like that kid in the classroom who was always doing the right thing, right? But whenever the teacher got mad at the whole class, you thought it was about you. So this is all to say that everything you've been doing has been helpful. Everything you've been doing has been so great. And if you are one of those people who's wondering, how can I do more? Where can I do more? Like, where do I go next in this moment? That's kind of what I'm asking and trying to present. So let me take this opportunity to share some additional ways to engage starting now. And we've already talked a little bit about interesting avenues for citizens during session. So now, first and foremost, if you do not know who your senator is, and it's okay if you don't, but this is your moment, this is the day, make sure it's done by the end of the day, you need to find that out. On their landing pages, if you go to your senator's landing page, you will see what committees they are on. You will see what bills they have introduced. And this is what like professional lobbyists do as well. So like you're now next level, you don't have to register and fill out paperwork, but like now you're here. You can see what committees they're on, what bills they've introduced. This will help you understand their priorities. It will help you understand their interests. You might even find fun biographical information that could help you find a commonality or a shared interest. This works amazingly, honestly. Maybe you went to the same college, maybe you had the same degree, maybe your cousins grew up in the same place. I've worked with people who found that out, who grew up down the street when they were growing up from so-and-so's cousin. Really anything that will help you find connections and start the conversation from a place that isn't at 11, but you know, sort of setting a baseline for that relationship is really important. You can also start a conversation at 11. Far be it from me, Erin Feitstinger, to tell people not to start a conversation at 11. But if you are interested in trying to figure out how would I talk to a senator, those are all great avenues for you to do that. If there is a bill or issue of particular interest to you, you can click on the bill page when you go to that bill listing, and you can pull up the recorded votes. You can find out how your senator voted on issues that were important to you and your family, like all through the last, the entirety of their term. And this is really important because we all need to be doing a better job of accountability for our senators who, as demonstrated by the emergency or the proposed regulations hearing on LB 574 on Tuesday, a lot of these folks make the votes and then walk away from whatever pain or destruction they've caused and never have to engage with it again. So we should probably do a better job of accountability. The next thing I want folks to do is make a list of 5 people in your network who could get engaged as well. Find their senators and make sure they have the information they need to engage throughout session as well. Literally just talked to a woman yesterday who was trying to get a meeting with a particular senator, and we went through her network and figured out who all of her network senators are. Turns out her dad lives in the district of the senator she was trying to get a meeting with. So there's your connection. There's how we're getting that meeting. The next thing I need everyone to do, I need you to start talking to your senator now. Send an email, get a meeting before a session. All of the above that we just talked about are going to help you start that conversation with them. You do not need to be an expert on every bill. Senators aren't experts on every bill, so don't hold yourself to that standard. You do not even need to necessarily know what bill or bills you want to talk to them about. All you need is your own experience as a constituent in that district. Tell them what matters to you. Tell them what you'd like them to focus on and what you don't want them to focus on. Offer to be a resource. You want them to think of you, their constituent, when a particular issue comes up as they're thinking through it or considering how to vote. Ideally, you want them to check with you first, but that's the ideal. If you're thinking right now, but Aaron, I have talked to my senator and they don't care, they aren't listening, I would suggest finding a senator who is listening, doesn't have to be your own, and who does care about your issues, and let them know your experience and your experience with your own senator. Ask them to help you get your voice heard. This is also a really useful thing. If you have a senator who's not your senator, but who's good on your issues, it's always good to email that senator, because if you were watching last session, you'll see someone like Senator Hunt will stand up and say, your constituents have emailed me because you're not listening to their voices, right? And that helps us put things on the record. That helps us create accountability. And it helps you feel like your voice is being heard. So you can absolutely feel free to do that, to email a different senator who is going to work on your issues. I would also spend some time familiarizing yourself with the leftover bills from last session. You're on a boring meeting. It's not this one, I'm sure, but you're on a boring meeting, you're on Zoom, and you can just be scrolling through that bill listing and jotting down the numbers of the ones you want to go back and look through. If you have questions about what a bill does, my email is right there. If it's not on our Women's Fund page, but you are interested in an issue, I am more than happy to walk you through what a bill does and doesn't do and sort of how to read a bill. If a bill is still in the committee, you can email the committee members directly before session and ask them to vote yes or no on a bill to either stop it or get it out for debate. A trick of the trade too is to check the interim study listing. This will help to give you a sense of what issues are rising to the top for individual senators and for the various committees. Help to anticipate what bills might be coming next session. So for instance, Senator Merman had an interim study on how social emotional learning in schools is really just a Trojan horse for CRT and the gay agenda. I would anticipate that we see some kind of bill coming out of that hearing, whether it's limiting social emotional learning, banning CRT, anything really that you could come up with from the conspiracy web, we will likely see come out of that hearing. Senator Brewer has an interim study on tomorrow for school security. We know that Senator Brewer wants basically unfettered access to guns, so we can make some sort of inference about what's going to come out of that hearing. Those are all bad. On the good side, Senator Conrad had one for the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Rainy Day Fund, which created good momentum for some of our existing bills on that particular program, as well as one for increased access to free menstrual products. So there are good things that are happening over the interim as well, and it gives you a good idea of what senators care about and are working on. If a senator introduced an interim study that seems of interest to you, you can absolutely email that senator and ask to talk to them about it. I would also say take the time now to get connected to organizations working on the issues you care about. Obviously, and hopefully, that is the Women's Fund. But there's lots of organizations out there who are monitoring the legislature who can help you follow the bills of interest to you. It doesn't just have to be the Women's Fund. We love you. We're so happy you're here. Please join us all the time. But if your issue is, access to guns, following Mom's Demand, if your interest is in increasing citizen engagement or access to democracy. The League of Women Voters is a great one. The legislative session and bills are incredibly difficult to track, even for those of us who do it professionally. And you all have your own busy lives, so getting connected to those organizations, including our own, is going to help you navigate that process. Also, get some rest, breathe, hydrate, and we're going to be ready on January 3rd. And sign up for our next Power Hours. Next week, we're going through bills of interest, leftover bills, as well as bills we would anticipate seeing, and some exciting ones that we'll be working on. And then that final one, I'm actually most excited about, because if you know me, you know I'm not good at self-care. So that last one is going to be about care and community and how we take care of each other in this time. I had no elegant plan for wrapping this up, so let's go right into questions. I was going to pull them up. Or Jill, are you going to read them? Sorry.
No, that's all right. There's one in there about if the 10th day ends and bills are still needing to be read, what happens to unread bills?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you cannot introduce a bill after the 10th day, the 10th legislative day. So if a senator, there's always a mad scramble at the end of that, that 8, 9, 10 days if you've got bills and drafting, that kind of stuff. But no, it's the first 10 legislative days. Now, that doesn't mean that if you miss that, you get your own, you didn't get a bill introduced, that you can't add it as an amendment to a different bill that has made it. So we saw that with the abortion ban getting attached to 574. And there were very good arguments made for the fact that we can't do this. You can't just add a new idea to a bill because each bill is required to have a public hearing. But that's what ended up happening, because even though we have rules, we also can bend them for our own partisan thing. So if you're working on a bill, if you're a citizen who's interested in writing a bill with your senator, you have an issue that's important to you, it would be great to start getting that done now and asking them, senators, if they anticipate that this, could get drafted and introduced, because bill drafters are going to get bogged down very quickly. So I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully. But day 11, don't worry. Everyone can breathe, and then you can just scroll through the bills. Any other questions? All right, I guess, unless anybody wants to ask without the Q&A.
Yeah, people should be able to come off mute now and ask questions if there are any other.
Also, if there aren't questions, that just means I crushed it and gave you everything you needed to know, which is a good day for me. The other thing I will say, I'm going to drop my name or my email in the chat, and truly, and I hear this from so many people, that they're like, I don't want to bother you, you seem really busy. You're not bothering me if you have questions about the legislative process. Anything, doesn't have to be even about a bill specific to the Women's Fund, anything like that. One of my great joys in life, and one of the best things I think we can do as folks working in policy, is help people access information. And a lot of that is just educating folks on, giving them the education they need to access it on their own. So always feel free to reach out, to email me. I am more than happy to help anybody through this chaos Elmo stuff. All right. Well, I'll let everyone else, I'll give you back your time.
Sorry, there's one more question that just came in. Any tips for interacting with a senator who may disagree on your position? this person has met their senator. It was clear that they needed education on basic disability issues.
Yeah, that's incredibly frustrating, and I'm so proud of you for reaching out anyway and doing that work. Senators are not experts on everything. Very few of them. A lot of them come with just one issue that they wanted to work on. So it is as frustrating as it is our job as citizens and as people to share our experience with them and help guide them through that process. So if your senator needs things like basic education on disability issues, one thing is definitely to give them that basic education, send them information, offer to connect them with other folks, right? Like maybe you find that connection with someone in their district or just some kind of connection that helps humanize the issue for them. And if it's a truly, you also have to protect your peace. So, even though I do this professionally, there are a handful of senators that it is not worth my time or emotional space to talk to because they will never agree and they are not good on this. And so protect your peace. If your senator isn't interested in what you have to say, find a senator who is, someone who's worked on disability issues. I'm more than happy. I'm sure you know who they are, but if you need that connection, I'm more than happy to make that for you. And start creating pressure around them to get on board with your issue. All right. Well, everyone enjoy. It's supposed to be a nice day. So, and sign up for our next one. Hopefully there will be other people talking besides me. And then definitely that last one on caring community. I'm super excited for that as we head into the holiday season and for January 3rd when that all starts. All right. Thanks, everyone.